Yeah.
And on that note, we probably ought to let people talk.
Before we break for questions, this has been a terrific session, and I think we're very privileged. Could I ask you to express your appreciation of the three speakers? Woo! Yeah. We only have 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to be one of those ruthless chairs who prevents people giving long speech their own memoir or testimony.
So they need. You don't want to just grab the cards?
I think that's going to take too long. We've only got 15 minutes, Mike.
Fair enough.
So, could I ask you to make your questions brief and to the point?
And we will promise to do the same.
Yeah, not long personal statements. I will cut you. Yes.
Yes, I was wondering whether a title should be missing from this discussion. The title would be 6 million plus 2. There were 6 million innocents killed, which are the two Rosenbergs. But the thing which I was interested in was the if the Rosenbergs had they been Donovans, O'Briens, or whatever, would the trial have proceeded? And then one last thing, the involvement of the fascist Nazis in this period of time in promoting anti-Semitism in various government departments, and that part of the story has never been told. The relationship between fascism and what was going on in the trial. And so
you're directing it probably to Michael?
Yeah, very briefly, I've always
That's a big
been
question.
uncertain about how much of a role anti-Semitism played. I believe that my father was targeted because he had been involved. I mean, I do think that Kaufman probably sentenced him to death as a way of saying, I'm a good Jew, and the commie Jews, I'm just as easy as the Goyim. And I don't want to be flipped by saying that. But, and the other part of it is, it gave the anti-Semites a field day. That's also very important.
Yeah.
I want to say something about that too. There is an ultra-conservative, ultra-religious Jewish group up in Monsey, New York, recently published a 60-odd page article about the Rosenbergs. It's the first Jewish group I've ever known about who have become partisans of the Rosenbergs. They held a very moving cemetery meeting about a month or two ago, at which they said the Rosenbergs have entered the pantheon of Jewish martyrs. They're talking from a religious point of view. You have to understand.
And an anti-communist point of view.
Yeah. Right.
Which
very
makes it more
anti-communist.
interesting.
They have entered the pantheon of Jewish martyrs because they accepted a death penalty and went to their deaths rather than give names of anybody. I don't think this idea has ever permeated the arguments about the Rosenberg case. They refused to involve anybody else in the agony that they were enduring.
Well, most non-communist Jewish organisations ran a mile from the case because they wanted to prove how patriotic and American they were. So this is quite a transformation. There was a question. Yes, you were next, and then you.
Yeah. So I want to say at that time, it was really many people felt my country right or wrong. I mean, there was like such a love of the country, but then from the political point of view, how do you control people who maybe could become radical? How do you control a society without a dictator? That is a serious problem. And I think that problem got solved by the Rosenberg case. Because once you put in the fear of each other and you rule by fear, and the consequences of that fear is your own death and being murdered by the state, you control the population. And that is exactly what we are doing now. It's not just that they...
And your specific question, if I can be
rude? Yeah, my question is there a current book that puts into context this type of thinking?
I think Dave and Emily's book, Exoneration, is probably the best context book.
We have a table 66 downstairs.
Which has just been published apparently, it's book here, which
Steve, Patty.
yes.
Could you clarify, you were talking about they were charged with one thing and tried for another thing. And it's not really clear to me what those two things were
Okay.
and how that sleight of hand can be pulled. And in reference perhaps also to not so much Julian Assange as Bradley Manning, who he hasn't been charged with anything yet, but is apparently going to be charged with any, and is that the same thing as treason, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, let me try to do it both. In the case of Miriam and Abe, they had a good defense lawyer, and the defense lawyer was able, by really strong direct examination and cross-examination, that everything that the government witnesses claimed they got from Abe was not secret. And Kaufman finally said, all right, let's stipulate that it's not secret. All right. Then, at sentencing, Kaufman praises the government for coming up with the obstruction of justice charge because there was a question of whether the statute of limitation would not permit an espionage indictment, completely introducing something that had been completely disallowed during the trial. In my parents' case, conspiracy to commit espionage, all you have to do if you're on the juror is believe that two or more people sat around a table, agreed to break the law, and one person did one thing, like Ruth Greenglass takes a train to Albuquerque, New Mexico. If you're the jury and you believe that, you convict. Then Kaufman in the sentencing speech says, who knows how many countless innocents will pay the price of your treason. Right at sentencing, here's something that maybe even you don't know. The Supreme Court Justice who all the time argued that there should be review of the case, he told the obituary writer for the New York Times, you know, obituary writers interview you before you die. You know you're ready to kick the bucket if the New York Times obituary writer shows up at your doorstep.
Oh, no.
And Hugo Black said he was upset because it appeared they had been tried for treason without the protection, the constitutional protection of it. So in both cases, the sleight of hand works beautifully for the public. Look at that headline from the Daily News. It's in here. It's in a spy plot. They're still insisting that Abe Brothman was a spy, even though there isn't a scintilla of evidence for it.
Right.
That's an absolute crucial question and answer. That disjuncture between what they're indicted for and what they're in the end convicted
Right.
of.
And
So
just to add to that is Alger Hiss, they knew that the charges against him happened in the 1930s, and this was 1948, and they couldn't get him on any kind of espionage charges at all. So they simply got him before the grand jury and said, "Did you commit it? Did you commit espionage?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Did you see what it ate?" He said, "No." So the charge was, of course, it was a spy trial.
So it's a similar thing.
Yeah.
And Bradley Manning?
People?
How this
Bradley
applies
Manning.
to Bradley Manning?
Yeah, I just think the point about WikiLeaks is that this is to governments all over the world.